for breakfast. I think we should call it dessert, not breakfast, for what most people are eating. Muffins, bagels, cereal, which is 75% sugar, pancakes, waffles, French toast, muffins. It's kind of a sugar lollapalooza. And he said, every afternoon, I just get overwhelming panic attacks. I start sweating. My heart's palpitating. I feel like I'm going to die. I can't breathe. The world's closing in on me. And I said, and what do you do? He says, well, I drink a can of Coke and I feel better.
So he was
and
on
I
a
said,
roller coaster, or glucose
yeah,
roller coaster.
it was sugars were up and down. And I'm like, you are hypoglycemic. So
Yeah.
even though your sugars can go high, they can go low. And I
Yeah.
think what
And for
happens is
me,
there's
it
an
was mental health as
overshoot.
well.
Yeah. And it creates all these mental health issues, depression, anxiety, palpitations, panic attacks. And then you mentioned a bunch of things that people aren't even aware of, like infertility or acne. I mean, most people don't think about that. Of course,
Wrinkles.
diabetes, wrinkles, right?
Yeah.
Wrinkles,
Aging.
dementia,
Yes.
heart disease,
Heart disease. Fatty
cancer,
liver disease.
fatty liver, every pretty much age-related disease. In fact, aging itself is often related to sugar issues and to lack of insulin sensitivity, which is what happens when you make a diet that is full of starch and sugar. You get these wild spikes in sugar, but then that causes a spike in insulin, and then sugar crashes. And then you need more and more insulin just to keep the sugar balanced, and ultimately that causes a whole cascade of problems that we now know as the fundamental drivers of aging.
Yes, and on the topic of aging, one thing that really startled me that I discovered is that every time your glucose levels spike, all the glucose that's rushing into your system, it's going to bump into other molecules, and it's going to do this thing called glycation to the other molecules.
Mm,
And when a molecule is glycated, it's damaged. And
mm,
glycation leads to us literally cooking from the inside, like a piece of
yeah.
toast in the toaster. That's what happens. And then when we're fully cooked, we die. That's why we die. And so the
Yeah.
more glucose spikes in your diet, the faster you age internally, but also externally, because it leads to wrinkles. It's mind
Yes.
blowing. It really is.
Yeah, it's true. I remember I was at this longevity conference that Menla Institute, which is Menla Center, which is by Robert Thurman, who's a Buddhist scholar, and he had the Dalai Lama there and all these Tibetan scholars, but also Nobel Prize winners and scientists about longevity. And there was Lenny Guarte there from MIT, who discovered sirtuins and the role of life extension by activating sirtuins with resveratrol and other compounds. And I said, these master regulators, like of aging, how do they get regulated? What screws them up? How does it work? He says it's sugar. Sugar is the biggest problem that we have in terms of not allowing these longevity switches to work properly. And so we literally
Yes.
turn off the longevity switch. We should have rapidly accelerate aging when we overconsume sugar, and I would say starch as well. I mean, that's just the
Hmm.
same as sugar, because you can eat a bagel or a sugar. It's the same thing.
Yeah. And so we end up in this situation where we know it's bad for us and we know we need to avoid glucose spikes, but often people can be a bit lost as to where to begin. Does it mean I should never eat starch and sugar again? That feels very draconian for most people. And so what I've developed are these 10 principles, these food principles
Oh, yeah.
that allow you to keep your glucose levels steady without giving up all the foods you love. Because personally, Mark, I need a chocolate cake for my birthday. I'm not going to have a Brussels sprout, low carb, no sugar cake. Like, I need chocolate cake. This is a
Well, carrot cake,
non-negotiable
maybe.
part.
Carrot cake.
Well, you're a bit better human than I am, but like, I love sugar. And so when I first discovered the world of glucose, my fasting glucose levels was 95. I was
Mm,
23 years old, and that was high. And through
yeah.
my hacks, I've lowered it to 79 without giving
Amazing.
up all
Amazing.
the stuff I love.
And that's two hacks. So we've got the timing
Yes,
of when you eat, what you eat when, right? Vegetables,
yes,
protein, and starch. And then the
yes.
vinegar before you eat. What else?
Uh-huh. So if anybody is still having a sweet breakfast, this is a very important hack. Have
And
a
of course,
savory
nobody listening to
breakfast.
this podcast ever eats a sweet breakfast, because they've been listening to this podcast and they know that we should not have dessert for breakfast. But just in case you haven't heard many of the podcasts,
Just in case this is
listen
the
up.
first podcast you listen to, have a savory breakfast. So in the studies, what they've done is they've taken two groups of people and they've given them two breakfasts, one of two breakfasts, same number of calories. We know calories don't count, but still it's important to mention this. One group had a breakfast that spiked their glucose levels. The other group had a breakfast that kept their glucose levels steady. What happened was, in the group that had the spiky breakfast, they got hungry again after 2 hours, whereas the group that
Uh-huh.
had the steady glucose breakfast didn't get hungry for 5 hours.
Of
So the
course.
curve, yeah, of course, the curve of your breakfast really determines how you're going to feel for the rest of the day and whether you're going to feel in control and connected to your body, or whether walking by that bakery is going to give you an irresistible urge to buy all the cookies like it used to be for me. I used to have a Nutella crepe for breakfast every morning growing up, Mark. And by 10:30, I was starving. I mean, it was
Nutella
bad.
crepe. Yeah, that'll do it.
But I'm recovered now. I'm recovered. And if I really want a Nutella crepe, what I do is I have it after lunch or dinner as a dessert, and I have some vinegar before. So that's another hack. If you
So
want
put
something
vinegar
sweet,
on your cookies. Is that the thing?
yeah, just pour
I'm not
vinegar
sure that's
all
gonna
over
go
my
over very
cookies.
well.
My friends love me when I come to parties. No, it's having the vinegar in the water before you eat the sweet thing, having the sweet thing after a meal, and also then using your muscles for 10 minutes. So your muscles are really your biggest ally in reducing your glucose spikes. And so what I
Yeah.
recommend, it's another hack. After your meals, use your muscles for 10 minutes. Top favorites include dancing to your three favorite songs really loud in your living room, going for a walk with your dog, doing the dishes, the laundry, whatever. Use your muscles. That way you'll curb the spike and you'll feel better.
That's a really important point. I think people don't realize this, but the data is so compelling on what you're saying, which is if you just take a walk after dinner for 15, 20 minutes, half an hour, you will see a dramatic change in your metabolism and your blood sugar.
Absolutely. Absolutely. It's really incredible. And this works particularly well to combat the post meal sleepiness that a lot of us feel. If you just use your muscles afterwards, you have all this energy again because you're not experiencing such a big crash. And if you can't go outside and you're just home and you're watching, for example, a TV show after dinner or a movie, people can get really creative. So you could do like, you could hold a plank in front of your couch while you're watching the movie. You could get some kettlebells and do some bicep curls, whatever works, whatever floats your boat. But that'll really help your body deal with the glucose coming through.
Amazing. What else? You've said 10 things. There's a lot more.
I know. I'll give you one more, but then the rest are in my book, Glucose Revolution. One more is putting clothes on your carbs. So, what do I mean? Do not
Putting
let your
clothes on
carbs.
your carbs.
Uh-huh. Don't let
No
your
naked
carbs walk.
carbs?
No naked carbs. No naked carbs. So
What's a
anytime you're
naked
eating,
carb?
aha. So a naked carb is sugar or starch that you're eating on its own, naked. You just eat it naked and it lands naked and it creates a big glucose spike. So to put clothes on your carbs, what you do is anytime you eat something sweet or something starchy, you make sure to put some protein, fat, or fiber on it. You put some
Mm,
clothes on that. So,
mm,
example, I'm going to take the chocolate cake example. I put Greek yogurt on it if I ever want it in the middle of the day. If you want a piece of sourdough bread, put some avocado on it.
yeah.
Put some butter on it. If you ever want to eat some rice, have some eggs with it, some smoked
Mm,
salmon, some
mm.
greens that you saute.
That's brilliant. I think the idea that we need to not be eating any of this stuff in a way that spikes our blood sugar is key. And what we're learning and what you learned through measuring your blood sugar for years and tracking everything is how different foods affect you. But the interesting thing is that what might affect you might not affect somebody else, and what affects somebody else might not affect you. So, can you talk about the differences in glucose metabolism from person to person, depending on their genetics and even their microbiome?
Absolutely. So when I started discovering the world of glucose monitoring, I set a few of my friends up with one as well, and we tested the same foods. So for example, we would eat the same cookie and then compare our glucose spikes.
Ah,
Turns out mine were always bigger than other people's, and I was like, darn it, I really love cookies. And so I started thinking, what does this mean? Why is my spike so much bigger than my friend Luna's spike? What's going on here? Well, many things could be going on. So, as you mentioned, microbiome could be a factor, hydration level, tiredness, how well we had slept the night before, muscle mass, obviously, because your muscles soak up glucose, insulin sensitivity, so you know how metabolically healthy we are, and just many, many more things, the phase of your menstrual cycle, your stress levels. There's a lot of stuff going on there. So it was really interesting to notice what choices might be better for my glucose levels compared to other people. But I kept coming back to the fact that the science shows that the hacks work in all of us. So if me and
Mm,
my friend who both ate the cookie had both put some clothes on the cookie, let's say, 10 almonds, both
mm,
of our spikes would have been proportionately smaller than the naked cookie spike.
mm.
So you have to keep that in mind. These principles work for all of us, but then if you have the opportunity to use a glucose monitor, you might discover much more personalized and in-depth, preferences that your body has.
Yeah, Jesse, I remember reading that Israeli study where they looked at the microbiome and how that uniqueness of each of our ecological community that we live in, which is our gut,
That lives in us.
how
Yeah.
how that actually is so determinant of what happens with our metabolism. And we know from animal studies that if you take the poop out of a skinny mouse and you put it in a fat mouse, the fat mouse will get skinny. Or
Yeah.
if
Or
you
in a
take the poop
diabetic
out of
diabetic to
yeah,
not diabetic. Hmm.
yeah, if you take a healthy, metabolically healthy person, which there's not that many of us around anymore, there's about only 12% of us in America that are metabolically healthy. But if you find a person, good luck, and you transplant their poop into a diabetic, their blood sugar gets better. And
Yeah.
I remember a case which I had years ago. I think I might have mentioned on the podcast once of a gentleman who had type 2 diabetes. We really poorly controlled. His sugars were well over 200 all the time. And we got him down to like 150, but we couldn't just get him all the way normal, even on a ketogenic diet. And one day he called me up and he said, Dr. Hyman, I'm having a lot of digestive symptoms. I'm bloated, I'm distended, I'm all these issues. And I said, okay, well, let's do some diagnostic workup, a stool test, or anything. But in the meantime, while you're suffering, just try some charcoal to see if that can absorb some of these sort of bloating and the gas and the toxins, which can cause these symptoms. And he did, and then he called me back and says, Doctor Hyman, I don't know what happened, but my blood sugar went to normal. I don't
No.
even understand, and I did understand because the microbiome plays this huge role in our metabolic health and something called metabolic endotoxemia, which means that
Mm.
the toxins produced by bad bugs in the gut when we eat the wrong things get absorbed and they cause inflammation. The inflammation causes us to be insulin resistant, and that makes us more diabetic. I mean, it's just a whole cascade of vicious cycle.
Wow.
And so simply by absorbing the metabolic toxins in his gut from bad bugs, we were able to actually correct his blood sugar. So it's quite fascinating. It's not as simple as we think. It's just, oh, just eat this or don't eat that, or exercise or don't exercise. It's kind of a personalized story. And I think there are universal principles, like you mentioned. I think I just want to loop back on something you said before as well, because you talked about these sort of toast that happens when proteins and sugars in your blood and you become toast and you're literally toast. I mean, it's actually it's actually true. You're toasting your system. And there's a phenomenon, it's called advanced glycation end products. And we measure this when we measure our average blood sugar through hemoglobin A1C, which is just measuring the proteins in hemoglobin getting glommed onto by sugar and forming this like crusty creme brulee, like chicken skin, that phenomena, it's called the Maillard reaction, happens inside your body, not just when you're cooking. And that is one of the hallmarks of aging is the abnormal proteins that form in the body that gum everything up. And this happens in your brain. It's called type 3 diabetes. It happens in your heart, your organs. It really is the phenomenon that leads to rapid aging and death. And then what's even funnier is that these things are called AGEs, advanced glycation end products, and they bind to receptors on your cell called RAGEs. So the AGEs make you rage, literally, and turn on all the inflammatory downstream phenomena that we see as inflammation. So it's such an important thing to understand. And regulating your blood sugar is probably the single most important thing you can do. I remember being at Kenya Ranch years ago, and there was a cardiologist that came from Harvard, and he gave a lecture, and he said, if you could take a group of 100-year-old people and you could find a group with clean arteries, they'd have one thing in common. What would that be? They're insulin sensitive, meaning they're very good at keeping
Mm.
their blood sugar even without a lot of insulin. That's the key to longevity and healthy aging. And not just that, but all these other conditions that you mentioned, from acne to infertility to depression to panic attacks to fatigue, energy, insomnia. I mean, night sweats are even a common symptom. Men get night sweats too, and often it's because they have these hypoglycemic spikes and they can wake up with soaked sheets. So really important to get your
Absolutely.
sugar dialed in.
So that's one of the things that happens when we have a glucose spike. It's the toasting. And maybe I can mention something else that happens when our glucose levels spike. So every cell in your body needs energy to function. You know, your brain cells need energy to think, your eye cells to see, your toe cells to dance all night long. Like every cell in your body is really hungry for energy. And the most easy place they get this energy is through glucose that we eat. And so, as you digest a meal and glucose goes into your bloodstream, it heads to your cells to be converted to energy. And the little organelles that do this work are mitochondria. They take glucose, turn it into ATP, which is energy. And so you might think, okay, well, if I need energy, then the more glucose I eat, the more energy I have, right? There must be a correlation just like that.
Yeah.
It turns out that's not the case. If you overwhelm your mitochondria with too much glucose, which is the case when a glucose spike happens, your mitochondria don't get excited. They actually shut down. They're like, whoa, whoa, can't deal with all this stuff. Don't know what to do. I'm stressing out. I can't work anymore. Your
Yeah.
mitochondria shut down and they get stressed and they release these things called free radicals into your cells. And free radicals,